Hello, good evening, everyone. We welcome you to another session of the online book club, the Malgudi Group. And we will continue our discussion on Arun Kolatkar's work, Jejuri. As we have discussed in the earlier session, these poems are based on the Khandoba cult at Jejuri. And we talked about the different poems and the myths associated with those poems. Today, I just want to begin with the thought that all these poems in this collection tell us one story, and that story is about this trip that Arun Kolatkar made to Jejuri with another poet, Manohar, and his brother, because these two figures, they also form a part of the world of Jejuri as depicted by the poet in these poems. So it is about a trip, and the way we move from one poem to another poem tells us that, okay, the poet saw this first, and probably these were the thoughts that came to him. Then the poet went to this other place, and these were the things that he observed. So there is a kind of narrative, and this is a point which I want to focus on today. So let me go back to the first poem, The Bus, which we discussed. The bus that took the poet to Jejuri. And there we talked about how from the beginning, the poet talks about going beyond institutionalized religion, looking beneath the surface. And that becomes apparent when the poet talks about going towards a destination just beyond the caste mark between his eyebrows. And he talks about a fellow traveler in the bus which takes him to Jejuri. This is significant, and this connects with the last sentence of the poem, that the poet gets off the bus, but he does not get into the mind of the man on whose forehead he noticed the caste mark. So again, going beneath the surface, going deeper into the outer aspects of ritualistic religion, this is a theme that we find from the very beginning. And then once the bus has reached the station and the poet gets off the bus, there is the priest waiting for similar passengers in the the bus stand, and hopeful that he would be able to convince someone to conduct some kind of puja at the shrine, and what would be his benefits. That is what probably the priest is thinking, and that is what the poem The Priest is about. Now, from that poem, we go to the poem titled Heart of Ruin. So probably that is the first ruined temple that the poet has observed, the temple of Maruti, which is no more intact, no more in its original shape, because there is degeneration. We don't know the reason of degeneration. There could be many factors, but it is not the usual temple, but a ruin. And then we learn how that ruin is not a ruin for the bitch and her puppies who take shelter there. And also it's a home for the dung beetle. Then from that ruined temple, we move on to the poem titled The Doorstep. So probably this gives me a sense that the poet is walking from one point in the shrine, in the holy place, to another point, exploring the area. So a doorstep comes into view, which the poet decides in the second line is not actually a doorstep, but a pillar on its side. So it is a kind of revisiting an idea or revisualizing something that is given and looking at something in a fresh light, in a new way. Then, as if the poet is trying to emphasize the truth of the later discovery, he says, yes, that's what it is. So it is not actually a doorstep, which it seemed to be in the first place, but it is a pillar on its side. So pillar on its side, a pillar is not supposed to be on its side. A pillar is supposed to stand straight. So again, there is this image of degeneration. Then from there, we come to the interesting poem titled Water Supply, which we discussed in our last session. But probably, the poet's focus or the poet's, thoughts were captured by this conduit pipe and the way it traveled all the way from the base to the top of the building in question. And the way this inert pipe, inert because it is not in action, it is out of order, not functioning. The way this inert thing has been given a route to follow, as if, it follows a route of its own accord, because it is interested to go to the top. And there at the top, it is dysfunctional. There is something broken in the way the end of the pipe is depicted. A brass mouse with a broken neck. Then something interesting happens. What about that millstone which is referred to in that poem? Why did it come there? Why is it placed under a dry water tap? That is the question which strikes the poet as important. And there is this focus on the word able-bodied. So an able-bodied millstone, why is it not being used? Why is it there with the dysfunctional conduit pipe? So probably this dysfunctional conduit pipe is a reference to the labyrinths of institutionalized religion. And though it seems out of order, it seems not to have any function or impact, still able-bodied men and women unquestioningly submit to the demands of religion, or they don't question the function of religion. Maybe that is the thought, that could have come to the poet's mind as he looked at that pipe. And then from the pipe, again, a door which was not a door, did not seem a mere door, but it was a dangling martyr, a prophet half brought down from the cross, a dangling martyr. So it's about a prophet who has submitted to something, a prophet who could have left that place, deserted that place. But something stopped that from happening. And from the outer spiritual theme, we come to something mundane, and that is a pair of shorts hanging on the door. And that is the central point of this whole poem. The pair of shorts, who must have belonged to someone who had faith, probably. And then from the door, we move on to a poem titled Chaitanya. So it is not Chaitanya in any form that the poet meets, but the poet meets a stone, a religious stone covered with vermilion. And just looking at that red stone, the poet is reminded probably of this Bengali saint Chaitanya, who later settled in Odisha. That is what the story goes. And Chaitanya was known for questioning the outer religious rituals without any meaning. And Chaitanya encouraged devotees to look for depths in religion, to explore depths, to question things, to try to find answers to those questions, and to submit to divinity without the interference of these outer rituals. So we can say a union which does not require an intermediate step. So that is the spirit of the poem, that the stone need not be smeared with vermilion. The stone can just be a symbol of divinity, and one would get flowers for the stone. Just like, this line is interesting. I'll still bring you flowers. You like the flowers of Jendu, don't you? I like them too. So just as I like the flower, so if I know that you like the flower, I will bring them for you. You need not, change yourself. You need not be covered with this red color. Then from there, we come to a poem titled A Low Temple. And it is interesting. There's a fact which we must know, that a low temple, from this whole collection of Jejuri, a low temple was published as a single poem first in a particular journal. But the editor of that magazine, while publishing this particular poem, lost the whole manuscript. The manuscript was lost. And Arun Kolatkar had to rewrite all the poems. So when he wrote these poems for the second time, there were changes in specific lines. And because A Low Temple was published, we know about these changes. We don't know about the changes of the other poems because we don't have published versions of the earlier poems. So a lot of changes might have happened. But it is interesting to know that in this particular poem, which of course talks about, a low temple where the deities are in dark and only the flickering light of a matchstick reveals the stone deities, and maybe encourages the onlooker, the poet here, to guess the different expressions on the face of the deity. And also to debate whether the goddess is 8-armed or 18-armed. So there is this hint at illusion, the theme of illusion. But there is this line which was changed in the new version. For a moment, the length of a matchstick gesture after gesture revives and dies. This line. So, as you know, the matchsticks from the matchbox are lit. So, for a moment, the length of a matchstick, gesture after gesture revives and dies. In the earlier poem, the expression was gesture after gesture revives like invisible ink. So, invisible ink got replaced with dies, revives and dies. So, probably the senses might be similar, but this shift has happened. And as readers, we can think about why this shift happened and what could be the changes in the suggestions. So probably, as we go ahead with our discussions, you would also tell me what you think about this change. But there is something else which this poem conveys, and that happens towards the end. The matter is not decided whether the goddess has 8 arms or 18, and uh, the poet comes out and lights a charminar. And then there is this line, children play on the back of the 20-foot tortoise. So this is a reference to a stone tortoise, a huge stone tortoise built in the premises of the Khandoba temple, where, so it is, maybe it is shaped like a stage, and different singing and dance performances, they are presented on stage. And also it is a place where children play when no performances are happening, of course, and no crowd is there. So children playing, that is the normal sight. So this also is a hint at the commercialization of the spiritual place, I think, because nowadays we see that temples are not just temples. There are other activities. There are feasts happening in temples, and temple spaces are lent for different functions, because that's a way of bringing in contribution for the temples. So, for the development of a temple, because the temple structures must be revived when required, or some new constructions have to be made. For all these purposes, these things have now become normal. But there also lies the question, is this related to what the poem Chaitanya said about religion being just a matter of union between human beings and divinity? So, okay, children playing, because the huge tortoise amuses them. And as the next poem also says something about this, the pattern. So as the children play, beneath their feet, some things become faint. What are those things? These patterns made with chalk, probably by old men who must have sat there talking about their lives. And while talking, they must have engaged in doodling on the ground, on the sand, or on the probably on the concrete, and where we see these patterns with a chalk. And those patterns become faint as children play there. So while these big questions are going on in the mind of the poet, these little things go about their own way. These symbols where old men have probably lost their worries by talking and by drawing these patterns, and children who are unconcerned with the religious connotations of these huge buildings and shrines and constructions, and they just are satisfied with a good place to play in. Then there is the transition to the poem title, The Horseshoe Shrine. And from the name, we can guess that there is a myth associated with this. Why should it be a horseshoe shrine? Actually, whenever Khandoba is represented in the form of an idol or a statue, he is depicted as riding a horse and accompanied by one or two of his wives. And in a particular place, there is a shrine where the hoof of Khandoba's horse is imprinted on a stone, and that is what the horseshoe shrine is. Now, what is this poem doing? And it is an interesting poem. When we read it, we notice that each stanza, the end of a stanza does not mean the end of a line. The sense and the sentence continues into the next stanza. And it is interesting that this particular poem, in each stanza, at the end, to mark the end of one stanza, there is just one word. And while I was reading this particular poem, it struck me. Okay. Now, what could be the significance? What is this form doing to the meaning of the poem? Maybe to get at that, some more readings are required. Right now, I cannot think of it, but at least the question is there in my mind. And that is something I like about reading poetry. There would be questions after the first reading. There would be more questions after the second reading, and so on. And that is what excites me when I read a poem. So this horseshoe shrine is now explained through this poem. That actually, this kick in the side of the hill is actually the imprint of Khandoba's, horseshoe. Okay, the shoe of Khandoba's horse. And this is sacred because Khandoba was accompanied by his second wife named Banai Devi, as she is called, who actually belongs to a family of shepherds. So while the earlier wife belonged to a family of higher class, Khandoba's second wife belonged to a family of shepherds. And he usually took her on these escapades, okay, no matter whether the goal was some religious work or it was simply an amorous pursuit. So he was accompanied by his second wife on these escapades. So the three of them, the horse and Khandoba and his second wife. So together, it seems, in one stride, they have reached somewhere. And that is the story that the horseshoe shrine tells us. And this poem is centered around that shrine. And then there is the shift to the poem titled Manohar. So Manohar Oak, the Marathi poet who accompanied Arun Kolatkar on this trip to Jejuri. And that is a very interesting poem, a short poem, but very interesting. And let me just read it for you. Manohar. The door was open. Manohar thought it was one more temple. He looked inside, wondering which god he was going to find. He quickly turned away when a wide-eyed calf looked back at him. It isn't another temple, He said, "It's just a cowshed." So when sanctioned religion encourages the worshipping of cows and cows are worshipped as Go Mata, why is a cowshed not a temple? Probably that is the question on which this short poem is based. And then from this poem, we move on to an old woman. So probably the poet met an old woman. And what did she want? She wanted a 50 paise coin. Why? Because she wanted to take the poet to the horseshoe shrine. But the poet has already visited that shrine and he doesn't need to go back to that shrine. So he wants nothing to do with the old woman. And he makes it very clear. But a shift happens when he looks at the old woman with attention. And when she says, "What else can an old woman do on hills as wretched as these?" And then the poet looks at her more clearly. You look right at the sky, clear through the bullet holes she has for her eyes. So probably her eyes are sunken and they seemed hollow, so hollow that through those eyes the sky could be seen. And as you look on the cracks that begin around her eyes, and as you look on, the cracks that begin around her eyes spread beyond her skin. So those wrinkles and cracks that are seen on her skin now extend beyond her skin. And the hills crack, and the temples crack, and the sky falls with a plate glass clatter around the shutterproof crone who stands alone. So it seems everything around the old woman shatters, but she stands. So if there is destruction all around and the figure stands, can't we see a connection between the idea of Shiva, the destroyer, and this old woman? So what is the connection? Now we are inspired to think in that line. And that is why the last stanza is very important. And you are reduced to so much small change in her hand. So the poet feels so small now before the old woman. So how this shift has happened? Only when there is a movement away from the rituals, not by ignoring rituals, but this movement we can make by going deeper, looking deeper into the rituals and questioning, thinking, making connections. Probably this is what is being hinted at. And then after some poems, which I'm just skipping because I want to come to this interesting poem, and I also want to stop so that I can listen to Shikha ma'am and Pragya ma'am. Ajamil and the Tigers. So this is a long poem, but an interesting one because it is based on the myth of Ajamil. So in this particular story, Ajamil is a shepherd who has a new sheepdog, a sheepdog that guards his sheep and protects the sheep from the tigers. But this new sheepdog is so efficient that the tigers don't get enough to eat these days. They don't get the chance to eat meat. Now, the tigers, they go to their king and they complain that we are starving, we are hungry, because the sheepdog that Ajamil has hired, the new sheepdog, is very efficient and very dangerous. So the Tiger King at first boasts that he will take care of the sheepdog, but he comes back injured. And then he says, okay, we'll attack that sheepdog in a pack and we'll outnumber that sheepdog. But again, they are defeated. And the language is very interesting. I should just read it out. I mean, the language is such that you won't feel we are reading a religious poem of any kind, a poem based on a religious shrine. Quick as lightning the sheepdog was, he took them all in as prisoners of war, the 50 tigers and the Tiger King, before they could get their paws on a single sheep. They never had a chance. The dog was in 51 places all at once. He strung them all out in a daisy chain and flung them in front of his boss in one big heap. So the poor tigers were now injured and defeated and together before Ajamil, the shepherd, the boss. So Ajamil is victorious. Still, he grants the tigers freedom because he understands that tigers must eat meat. He understands that it is not just about preservation of sheep, but it is also about the preservation of the race of tigers. And tigers, it is natural for them to hunt sheep. So in spite of being victorious, this step on the part of Ajamil of allowing the tigers the chance to feed on sheep, not hunting, but sheep that would be willingly offered by Ajamil to the tiger community. So a pact was signed, a friendship treaty, that tigers would not attack sheep for no reason, and a regular offering of sheep would be made to the tigers so that they can eat and live. So live and let live. That kind of a treaty was signed between Ajamil and the Tiger King. So that is what the poem is about. That Ajamil was not a fool. Like all good shepherds, he knew that even tigers have got to eat sometime. A good shepherd sees to it they do. He's free to play a flute all day, as well-fed tigers and fat sheep drink from the same pond with a full stomach for a common bond. So a full stomach, here the stomach of the tigers, is responsible for the common bond. This poem seems different because it is about a story. It is a myth, and something must have inspired the poet to think of this myth and the implications of this myth. Because you see, when we are talking about the tradition of Vagyas and Muralis, the male and female devotees of Khandoba, respectively. Vagyas have a connection with tigers in another poem, a song for a Vagya. Because you see, in the last session, we stopped at this point. We read these two poems, a song for a Vagya and a song for a Murli. And we had decided that we would begin the next session with a discussion of these two poems. But just before coming to these two poems, I was inspired to look at the chain between the poems. So a song for a Vagya actually tells us that Vagya has descended from a tiger. Vagya's mother is a tiger, a tigress. And he has killed his mother for her skin. because he's so devoted to Khandoba, and he must light a flame to keep the Khandoba temple intact. Because there is a fear, we don't know the reason, but there is a fear that the Khandoba temple might fall during the night. So he has to light a flame, and to light that flame, he requires oil. And to ensure a constant supply of oil, he must beg. From home to home, he must go and fill up his pouch with oil. Now, that pouch has been created from his mother's skin, who is a tiger. So there is this connection between the Vagya, the story around the Vagya, and the story of tiger, which actually, because you see, from Ajamil and the tigers, we come to this poem, a song for a Vagya. It is interesting that the poem ends in this way. A song for a Vagya ends in this way. God is the word, and I know it backwards. I know it as fangs inside my flanks, but I also know it as a lamb between my teeth, as a taste of blood upon my tongue, and this is the only song I've always sung. So, from this particular stanza, there is a sense that religion or spirituality is deeply connected with our daily needs, our needs for survival, which is why Ajamil, in spite of being victorious, thanks to his able sheepdog, he understood the need of the tigers for meat. The tigers need meat, and that is why he offered. This treaty was signed, this pact was made. So this stanza seems to me to highlight this connection between spirituality and one's basic needs. What is that connection? We have to explore. We have to go further into the next poem, a song for a Murli. It's a short poem, and it begins with the image of the moon. Look, the moon has come down to graze along the hilltop. So now the moon is a horse, and the horse is grazing along the hilltop. You dare not ride off with it. Don't you see Khandoba's brand on its flank? You horse thief. So someone is being told that you cannot take away this horse because this horse has the mark of Khandoba. This is Khandoba's horse, which in fact is the moon. Then the poem says, look, that's his name tattooed just below the left collarbone. So we, from the horse, the moon-turned horse, we now come to a mark just below the left collarbone of someone. And who is that person? We know in the last stanza. Keep your hands off Khandoba's woman. Okay, so Khandoba's women. Who are Khandoba's women? Those who have been offered as girls to Khandoba. That is a tradition where a young girl, a girl child is offered by the parents to the temple, and then they wash their hands off the responsibility of caring for the girl. So the girl becomes a Murli, married to the sacred Khandoba. But how the girl would survive? What happens after that? What would she do to take care of herself, to lead a good life? All those questions are not taken care of. Which is why the last line is very surprising. Keep your hands off Khandoba's woman. So probably, this hints at the fact that, okay, they are sacred women and you cannot do anything wrong to them. Keep your hands off them. But then, keep your hands off Khandoba's woman, you old lecher. Let's see the color of your money first. That is how the poem ends. Let's see the color of your money first. So this is a hint at the predicament of Devadasis, because Murli is just another name for a Devadasi, a girl who has been offered to the god as a Dasi. She will serve the god all her life and do nothing else. And how is a Devadasi turned into a prostitute or someone who is allowed to have sexual relationships just because she has to support herself? She has to have food and survive, and then go on doing her duty towards Khandoba, go on performing, dances and singing songs in honor of Khandoba. Actually, in Maharashtra, there is a law now which claims to check these kinds of injustices done to Devdasis there. But how far this practice has been checked and why this kind of a practice ever emerged is something that the poem hints at and something that the poem questions. Uh, young girls who are offered as Murlis, they cannot return home. I mean, they cannot come back to their parents' home. They are given away for good. So then, if they are given away when they are mere children, what is the support system for them? Actually, you see, there was a story about a particular child who was offered to Khandoba in that way. And no one wanted to raise her as a daughter, because you see, even the common people and the people who are said to be the lawmakers and the protectors, even they are afraid of this ritual. Oh, she is Khandoba's woman now. We can do nothing about it. What if something wrong happens to us because we meddled in Khandoba's affairs? So thoughts like these, they keep people from protecting such small girl children who are offered to Khandoba. Usually what happens, because Vagyas and Murlis, they perform together, usually a kind of relationship develops between them. And sometimes they live together and raise a family together, and that is accepted. But you see, that is accepted again and not accepted, because once that happens, again, the Murlis are taunted. You were supposed to be devoted to Khandoba. How come you had a relationship with a Vagya and had a family of your own? So now again the taint is the Murlis. So all these things, all these issues, all these images, they make us question different religious rituals that we see around us. Jejuri is just one place and has a set of rituals. There are many such places of worship, and there are many such rituals which, must be questioned because they are. So I think as the poet moves from one point in the shrine to another shrine, there is a sort of spiritual development happening within him, which is why every object, every sight, every thought accompanied by what he sees or hears is part of that story of the trip that he made to Jejuri. And there is also an interesting poem about his brother, the next poem, after one or two poems. There is a poem titled Makarand. So Makarand is his brother. And the poem goes like this: Take my shirt off and go in there to do puja? No thanks, not me. But you go right ahead if that's what you want to do. Give me the matchbox before you go, will you? I will be out in the courtyard where no one will mind if I smoke. So I will stop at this particular point, and I would like to invite Pragya to share some of her thoughts while reading these poems. Yes,
Hello, Shatrupa.
Yes, Pragya.
Is it okay if I keep my video switched off?
Sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the two things that I found interesting this time when I read Jejuri were the one that you mentioned, how bits and pieces and major chunks of history keep getting lost with the passage of time, and they cannot be retrieved again. Right. When you look at the detail with which the old woman has been described, you wonder what she would have been as a young woman, how she came to be there. Maybe one of the girls, the Murlis, who is now reduced to being a beggar, whose only worth in her, you know, your only worth in her eyes is the money that you can give. I found it really interesting how you likened her to Lord Shiva, because with everything being slowly chipped away, she stands dauntless. That was interesting. And why I thought of lost histories was because of the 18 armed goddess. It's a very good example of a dominant culture taking over a subculture. The goddess might have originally been 18 armed, but because we are uh, familiar with the Ashtabhuja form of Durga, so the priest insists that no, it's the eight armed goddess. She might have been an earlier goddess, a subcultural goddess who has another set of stories associated with her, the 18 armed one. But we will never find out what the story is. And it is this which puzzles the poet, and he relieves his frustration by stepping out of the temple and smoking a cigarette. There is so much cigarette smoking in this section of the poem, He does not get the answers to his curiosity, and then he's reduced to smoking cigarettes. Because how do you relieve your frustration at not getting answers? Also, there is a poem about how the gods are imprisoned inside that glass plated cupboard. They are reduced to curios. You remember how we'd read about curios, like showpieces. Earlier, household items and furniture and not appliances, but utensils, they used to be beautiful enough to supply the beauty of a household. Slowly emerged this idea of a drawing room and a showcase where you could uh, deck things up and prettify things by keeping beautiful things. And we kind of read that it's a colonial practice, keeping things for decoration, where the purpose of the thing is not to help the household, but just to look pretty, to elevate the status of the house owner in the eyes of the visitors. About, see, this guy has taste. And that is how the gods that is the status to which the gods have been reduced. Things of beauty. you light up a match, and in the flare of the match they come alive. Stories which, flare up, and then again they subside with the extinguishing of the match. So many things that can never be known, they sweep into our attention, and then they are just swept away. And this poem relies heavily on this ruined architecture, where stories are lost. They are not absent, they are there. And that's why they tantalize, because you keep on speculating as to how they would have been, what kind of stories are we not being told. It's such a mystery. That is all. That is all.
True, Pragya. And that is why, we have this urge to keep coming back to these poems, because that mystery uh, is always unsolved and there is further exploration to be done. Which is why, while talking about the poems, I was also feeling a bit afraid, you know. Okay, am I talking about it in the right way? I know that there is no right way to read a poem, but still, because of that mystery, maybe surrounding these poems, there was an element of fear when I was talking about the poems. Because reading a poem and then talking about a poem, there is a big responsibility. And this was an emotion that was there in me. So I was awed, but I was also afraid. Uh, you see, just as there is this one brick, which if you take it off, then a whole structure crumbles. And there is this theme of degeneration or ruins, as you rightly said, throughout, the fabric of all the poems, almost all the poems. So thank you, Pragya, for these interesting points. And now I would like to invite Shikha ma'am to share her observations on Arun Kolatkar's poems in Jejuri. Yes, Shikha ma'am. You are on mute, ma'am. Uh, please, yes.
Hello, am I audible?
You are audible, yes.
Namaskar to everyone. Um, I would like to begin where you left, ma'am. At the question of responsibility, I would like to begin with the question of responsibility and this anxiety over how we are interpreting. Because as a scholar of Indian knowledge systems, I have realized that whenever we look at Indian texts, whether written in bhashas, the regional vernacular languages, or whether Indians who write in English, or whether the bhasha texts which are translated in English, there is always a very straight-jacketed approach in terms of thinking that English writings are towards modernity, or they represent modernity, and there is a fissure or a break between tradition and modernity. But then Kolatkar to me is a very, very serious artist, a very serious poet, and indeed it requires a lot of responsibility when we talk about him. In this context, I would like to bring Jejuri alongside another collection of poems by him known as Bhijki Bahi. So Jejuri interestingly won the Commonwealth Prize, whereas the Marathi collection of poems called the Bhijki Bahi was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award. And Bhijki Wahi, if we loosely translate it, it would mean a notebook that is smeared with tears. And here, why it was important for me to bring in these two volumes together so as to understand even Jejuri better is the reason that Jejuri is based on his travels to Jejuri, which is a site of pilgrimage in Maharashtra, in the Pune district. Whereas in Bhijkivahi, there are references to Tukaram, who is a saint poet who lived in around 16th, 17th century Maharashtra. And he is associated with a place called Pandharpur, which is a pilgrimage centering on the Lord Vithoba. So here there are two traditions facing each other in the context of bhakti tradition in Maharashtra. So here we have Jejuri and the temple devoted to um, uh, the Shiva form,
Khandoba.
Khandoba, and on the other side we have Tukaram and the Pandharpur pilgrimage, which largely celebrates Vithoba. So now these two places have been historically very, very significant in the context of the rise of bhakti. I won't use the word movement, I would use the word tradition here. Because the moment the word movement comes in, the discussion tends to take another course. But here I want to concentrate on Kolatkar's engagement with the tradition. That's my focus over here. And when we look at his texts, we get a very, very fluid linkage between the tradition as well as the contemporary ethos of the Indian society, where he is trying to desperately hold on to hopes and to the possibility of divine deliverance in a world which is essentially crumbling down. And he is also not somebody who, as a poet, is trying to shy away from uncomfortable questions. He's raising those questions as well. For example, when you spoke about the poem which deals with the cause of the Devadasis and how the entire question comes, I mean, comes to, I mean, the entire question is just about the money at the end. And I think that is the power of this writer who is very earnest to not shy away or to hold on to his tradition, to the very rich bhakti legacy to which he belongs, being a Maharashtrian, and also at the same time questioning and discussing and contemplating over issues which have gone wrong, or maybe because of which the whole question of religious degeneration comes into being, is open for deliberation. And then uh, also the fact that the approach that a bilingual author has is always more nuanced and more you know in depth, I would say, or rather they are more successful in presenting the complexity of the society. Why I feel this is because they are thinking in two languages, they're feeling in two languages, and they're also capable of writing in two languages in the world which is increasing monolingual. So this precisely is the quality which I find in G.N. Devi's writings, Of course, he is more towards language and linguistic studies along with the Indian aesthetics part of it. And on the other hand, this kind of this ability to bring in complex ideas very convincingly is also there with Girish Karnad, because he himself was very, very deft, multilingual, I would say. So I think when we look at these kinds of authors, it indeed is a matter of great responsibility, and we cannot deny that there is no fear involved. Of course, there is fear involved. I think I have that. I have this much to offer today, and it was so lovely to listen to you, ma'am. And I was astonished when you ended with what I was about to begin, and I think that's the beauty of being a human being, because we share emotions at the end of the day. So thank you so much for having me.
True. Thank you so much, Shikha ma'am. And I'm sure, this forum would greatly benefit from your participation in the future sessions as well. And
I
it
would
was
love
really
to.
interesting the way you brought in this comparison between the original work, the work in one language compared to its English version. And as you rightly mentioned, bilingual writers have an added advantage. And also, the readers have an added advantage when the writers are bilingual. And it is an advantage if you know the original language in which a work is written. But even if you don't, you can actually, listen to discussions about these two languages and how they depict the same theme. So, this is really interesting, the aspect which you brought in. And the thing you said about the relationship between tradition and modernity. And when we read writers like Arun Kolatkar, it is, as you rightly said, it's very easy to just, say some set things about this particular writer because he has been called an experimentalist along with Dilip Chitre. So, actually, we need to forget everything, the period to which they belonged, the society, which informed their poems and the writing trends of their time. If we just take ourselves a bit apart from all these things, and if we just go into the poems, maybe new things would come up, and we will not just go with these, branding that Indian English writers, they only champion modernity at the cost of tradition,
Yeah.
which is what you rightly mentioned. Yes, thank you so much. It was a pleasure listening to you. Yes, so since Jigyanshu has been patiently listening to all of us, I must invite him to say something, at least whether he liked the session or. Yes, Jigyanshu.
It was a very insightful session for me to hear all my revered seniors deliberating upon these important aspects about the ritualistic aspects of a religion as well as the philosophical aspects of a religion. Uh, Ma'am, you told us to inquire more into the words ink and death. That is the reference. So, according to me, in one, I think in one poem the poet ends the line with ink, and in another poem the poet ends the line with dies or death. Dies, I think. D-I-S. Dies. So I think perhaps his mind was shifting from an agonistic to an atheist. I think that is how I interpret this aspect of the poet's mind. And the in the low temple, the reference about uh, light being brought into after the rise of the sun in the near the Charminar. So I was inquiring that what would be the thought process of the poet behind writing these lines. That is when there is sunlight already. Now you need to flicker the light in the Charminars. So I think that is one aspect which
Okay, yes, Jigyanshu, that's a good question. And I think, lighting that Charminar is a reference to smoking, not for the light itself, but
yes,
a reference to smoking, as if, oh my God, I cannot understand the mystery of this place, and why is the priest so adamant about the number of hands of the goddess, and why won't the priest listen to me when I say, look, the goddess has 18 hands, and maybe the frustration, is just even a vent with the lighting of the Charminar, and just looking at the children playing nonchalantly there.
yes, ma'am. And another aspect that is after the ruins of the temples, the poet mentions next poem, that is the doorstep. I think the doorstep. So doorstep is like a great way for us to escape from.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a point to
Yes, yes,
make
Shikha
here.
ma'am, please.
Actually, ma'am, Charminar used to be a very popular brand of cigarette at a point. So I don't know what he was trying to say. I mean, the poet was trying to say by this phrase, by using this phrase. But then this thought just came to me, so I just said,
Yes, that is a link definitely, and which is why this reference to smoking could be the possible explanation.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, ma'am.
Jigyanshu. Yes, please go ahead.
The next thing which I noticed was after the ruins of the temples were discovered, the poet went there. And now in the next poem, he is talking about the doorstep. So doorstep is like a gateway for us. I mean, to come out of that phase, after the phase of apocalyptic phase. After that apocalyptic phase, which was ubiquitous, I think, for the poet because he finds everywhere ruins and remnants of the bricks and of the destruction of temple. So now he is inquiring about a doorstep, but is astounded to find the pillar that is a stumble block. The pillar can be inferred uh, or be deciphered uh, as a block or hindrance to the poet's quest for coming out of that destructive phase. I think that is how I inquire.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, we can look at the pillar in that way, of course, and it's very inspiring to listen to you. That each of us will definitely approach the poem in uh, a way that appeals to us, or that connects to our thoughts, and that is why this forum is very important, to see uh, how another reader would see the same line, or how another reader would look at the word which appealed to me in this way. So it's an interesting, yes, the concept about the pillar being a hindrance. Okay. Uh, and again, if we take that line of thought, the way it is mentioned, it's a pillar on its side. So probably again, the hindrance has also been dealt with. So even as there is a hindrance, there is also a hint of the poet dealing with that hindrance.
Yes,
Isn't that so?
exactly.
Yes,
Now,
very interesting.
we would say that the pillar is coming or is coming in front of the doorstep, or it is near the. I think it is in close vicinity of the doorstep. That is not directly. We cannot decipher that the pillar can be the stumble block or I, the the main important thing is a result of which the poet's passage is hindered. But we can say that both are staying in close vicinity. That is both positive as well as the negative being in cohabitating phase. We can say that.
True, true. And that is that tension also comes because of this close vicinity of two opposing things. Isn't that so? And that is what charges the poetry with meaning and suggestions, plurality of suggestions.
And
Yes.
again, since the poem delves deeper into the conflict between the ritualistic aspects of a religion and the philosophical aspects, since I myself very much interested in Indology and studying about Indic philosophies. So I was watching in YouTube. I was watching uh, a book launch event of Sasi Tharoor. I think Why Am I a Hindu? The book's name was that, and Dr. Karan Singh, who was the former former governor of Jammu and Kashmir, and he was also the Sadar e Riyasat, the title that was given to him. Now, I think after Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, one of the most sterling intellectuals in Indic philosophy is Karan Singh for me. I'm quite impressed by his line of thought regarding Saivic philosophy in Kashmir. But he says that when Sati Tharu, there was a funny banter between them, both of them. Now, both of them belong to the same at that time. I think I'm talking about 2018. At that time, Dr. Karan Singh was a member of Rajya Sabha, and Sasi Tharoor was from Tiruvananthapuram. He was elected MP from a Congress ticket, and both of them were congressmen. But in some aspects, they had divergent views. Like Sasi Tharoor was more interested in the philosophical aspects of Hinduism. Like according to him, the Vedas and the Upanishads were in high esteem as compared to the Puranas and other ritualistic aspects or Mimamsa school of thought. Now, Karan Singh comes in the way and says that no, no, you cannot say that because he gives words from the Upanishad. I think from the Chandogya Upanishad. I'm not able to recollect the uh, exact quotation from which he decided, but the Sanskrit verse goes like Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. That is, the truth is one. The wise men decipher or deliberate explain it in various ways. Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. Vadanti means describing something. So I think that is what is essentially what he tries to convey, that no, we can have the philosophical aspects of a religion as well as ritualistic aspects of a religion, but we cannot denigrate any of them in order to push or uplift any single aspect of a religion. I think that was quite fascinating for me. I recollected it, I think, while reading the poem and
So
delving.
wonderful. These ideas that you bring up are so wonderful. Thank you for participating and making this session interesting. Which that is what I was hinting at. That it's very easy to just say rituals are they are to be done away with, and we should ignore them. And rituals are lesser, and the philosophy is something higher. But then that is the thing. You look deeper into the rituals. You try to understand why those rituals developed in the first place, the origin of those rituals, and why they took this shape, and why they departed from the original thing, or what are the developments. So you cannot just ignore these rituals and say that yes, I can understand spirituality. No, you have to delve deeper and you have to understand them. You have to question, yes, but you have to go through the rituals. You cannot just ignore them, because rituals also mean history. Rituals also mean psychology. Rituals are a reservoir of culture, and they are a story of how society has been shaped and how individuals operate in that society.
I think that the rituals also play a vital role in weaving or acting as a collective seed or community sense of community that prevails in a society is deciphered more not from the philosophical aspect of a religion, but the rituals that we practice. That they play a vital role in binding us as a society. If we take into aspect
True,
of it.
definitely. And this is such an interesting subject of discussion. I would like to invite Shikha ma'am and Pragya ma'am. They have to say anything on this. Please go ahead.
Here, I would just like to intervene and say that rituals just do not mean the customs or the procedural methods that entail uh, worshipping or any ritual which sets apart one religion from another. Rituals, in fact, rituals, the meaning of the word has been shrunken and made very, very simple in that sense. But then, for me, from the kind of readings that I have done so far, rituals also mean methods actually. And even when spiritual practitioners do their sadhana, uh, techniques of meditating or the niyams that are followed in the yogic systems, rituals also mean how you discipline your own body and mind. But unfortunately, rituals as procedures to demonstrate religious affiliation, I mean, that image has gone far more ahead and percolated within the layers of the world cultures. But then rituals is a very, very deep word, which incorporates and entails a lot of other things: pedagogy, procedure, learning, teaching, so many of those things. But then to be able to interpret ritual in that kind of a light, one has to have some familiarity with Indic traditions. That's all that I would like.
So this was a very interesting session, and we would like to come up with another session soon, because we also want to talk about the other poems which were left untouched. There are still more poems to talk about in Jejuri, and from Jejuri we plan to move on to Sarpasatra. So I think we should have another session on Arun Kolatkar's Jejuri, and then we can continue with Sarpasatra. So today it was a very interesting discussion. Thanks to Shikha ma'am, to Pragya ma'am, and to Jigyanshu for bringing in those interesting observations and questions. And so today we can wind up the discussion here. Thank you all for joining and contributing. And it was a great discussion. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Meet
ma'am,
again.
for having me. Thank you.
So, thank you, ma'am.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes. Bye.